Welcome back to another episode of Profitless on Purpose, the nonprofit podcast from an accountant's perspective. Not just one accountant. I'm one of your hosts, AJ Wheeler. With me this week is Mark Palardy.
Hey, everyone.
Tammy Hess.
Hello.
We have a new member on the podcast, Tony. Tony, welcome this week.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me.
We have a really good episode this week. We have a couple articles for you. The first one is Foundation Giving Report. Tony found an article that kind of breaks down where charitable donations ended up at the end of 2020, how they're shaping up for 2021, where the gains, losses, big winners, big losers, all that stuff. We'll talk about it in this podcast. Our next article is 5 surefire ways to bomb a donor meeting. 5 things you should not be doing when you meet with your donors, especially major ones, and maybe some suggestions from the panel on how to ace that donor meeting. And then 10 things you won't hear from an accountant. This is kind of a fun little article on things you won't hear from a good accountant, at least. And then our do's and don'ts this week. We're continuing our series on do's and don'ts. We have a good one this week, nonprofit hiring do's and don'ts, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. We even have some horror stories about some interviews of our own. So stay tuned. It's a good one. But without further ado, Tony, you want to kick us off with our first article?
Well, hello, everyone. So the article I have is Foundation Giving Numbers for 2020 show a 15% increase. And this article was from Nonprofit Quarterly. So I like this article because I was astounded at how much was given in 2020, which is according to a study by University of Indiana at Purdue. In 2020, it was $471 billion, which is a 3.8% increase over 2019. I would never have thought that there was that much money given to nonprofit organizations, which is a good thing. So the article goes on to say, as of June 2021, the nonprofit sector had lost 685 jobs from February 2020, which was a 5.5% decline. So they talk about donations. I guess they come in 3 sectors with the donations from individuals is actually the least amount, and then it's earned income was the first one, and government contracts was the second one. So what they do is they laid out a chart of donations giving. They break it down, individuals, foundations, bequests, and corporations. So, and then they talk about each segment of the donations. With foundations gifts were up 15.6% in 2020. Then they go on to talk about bequests were up 9% because of the stock market values. Then they go on to talk about the individual giving, which is less than 70%, which is usually a little bit low concerning, over the last half century or so, it's usually over 70%. Then they talk about some financial factors. They mentioned the CARES Act, and that the personal income had climbed 6.1%. They talk about the stock market climbed 16.3%, and then they talk about the $300 charitable deduction that was added to the tax forms. So it was an interesting article. I learned a lot, and like I said, I was surprised at the amount of donations given. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was surprised too. I didn't know, actually, I don't know if I saw it before or not, but I was really surprised that individual giving made up that much of kind of overall donations. And one of the more, I just, to be almost over 70% historically is just kind of crazy to me. I would think that, foundations and kind of grant givers and such would be much more, I thought they would be a higher percentage. And what I find kind of appalling with the numbers is the fact that corporations dropped their giving when they had like the, like records. Most corporations, or if we're looking overall, we talk about the stock market moving, they probably had, 2021 as a better, income, and 2020 incomes of corporations were up. So that's disconcerting, I think, the fact that they cut their charitable donations at a time when it was probably needed. But it was neat to see that, individual giving made up so much of that pool of money that went out. So I thought it was interesting, and it's neat to put numbers together, I think, with kind of where all of like the organizations are getting their donations from. So it was neat. I thought it was a good article, Tony.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a good article, Tony. I think there's a lot of data in here, a lot of statistics, but some real meat on the bone, if you will, coming from your vegan podcaster. If you look at one of the tidbits I got out of this, because the thing is called foundation giving is up, and there's a statistic in there just in one of the paragraphs that says in 1980, 5.8% of charitable donations were from foundations. And then slowly over at 2000, it was 10.7%. At 2010, it was 14.2%. And then 2020, we're up to 18.8%. That's almost 20% that we're aiming towards foundations. So there's a real restructuring in the way that people are getting money in nonprofit land. And I think it's if you are somebody who is stuck in thinking that you can only get, donations from individuals, start looking at those foundations, because they really seem to be taking a larger and larger piece of the pie. The other piece of this article that really struck me, which, is not, I hate to end on a down note, but it's the giving by nonprofit type chart that they have in here, where it talks about the different sectors and which ones fared well versus which ones not so much, right? And so the public benefit sector did actually fairly well. Their numbers went up 14.3% from the prior year. And those kinds, not public benefit, donor advised funds, racial justice funds, kind of makes sense that would go up in 2020. Similarly, arts, cultures, and humanities at the bottom end of that went down by 8.6%. Now, that's a blow. That's not even including earned income. So that means they're not even getting revenue, arts organizations, from people coming to their venues. Not only that, but the donations to them, which are probably often spurned by people going to these great events at museums, art institutions, et cetera, their giving went way down. So 8.6%. So I think the arts and humanities is going to be a sector to watch over the next year to hopefully see as things open up if they can recover, because that is not a sustainable number.
I really like this article. I think giving, to AJ's point, giving kind of the data of with numbers in terms of actually what happened during the year is a great kind of viewpoint, because I also was very shocked in the sense of how much the corporations give in donations. You always, in my mind, I guess, so I would say, I always kind of think that the corporations, especially when they're advertising and they're saying, here's how much we're giving, you kind of think that means that they're giving large amount of dollars to various different charitable organizations. And to see that, it was the least out of all of them. And that in a time to, when we think about 2020, where a lot of people were without jobs, you would have anticipated that the individual giving would have actually gone down, and maybe corporations would have stayed the same or gone up, because in some cases, some organizations had a good 2020, all things considered, and in terms of sales and profit. So it's a very interesting kind of piece to really look at that story and what the history is for 2020, and also to think about how that it shapes for 2021 and going forward. But I was very surprised to see the kind of the strong, support from individuals, especially that it really only changed by 1%, is quite, it's outstanding. It's a good article. I think AJ has the next article.
I do. So my article is five surefire ways to bomb a donor meeting. So this was an article that was featured in Philanthropy Daily, and it kind of goes through what they're talking about is when a fundraising or a development person goes out for a meeting with a donor. And usually these are, this can be a large donor that you're trying to reel in for a large gift, or it could be like a foundation meeting or something that you're applying for a grant from. So but it's really geared at an individual donor kind of meeting. And so I'll go through the steps and I'll kind of give you some of my thoughts on it and see if you guys have anything to add to it. So the first don't, I guess, or 5 surefire way to bomb is forget to ask for money. I've seen it, like often if you've ever been or tried your hand at sales, often they tell you, like you have to ask for the money or you have to ask for the sale. So one surefire way for somebody not to donate is not to ask them for the money. You tell them all the great things about your organization or what you're trying to get them to fund, and then forget the ask. So the ask is the biggest part of this, and you're cultivating a donor to try and give you money. And often that's probably the hardest part for somebody to get over on, I think as a fundraising individual or even as a salesperson. So number 2 is don't be late. Often, if you're talking about large donors, these people have very limited time and they probably have you pinned into their schedule, and it's not going to leave a good impression if you show up late to the meeting. Of course, if you're unavoidably going to be late because of traffic or, something that outside of your control, of course, be able to call them and let them know and try to reschedule it and be very apologetic. But try to be 5 minutes early. I mean, I think that goes with everything in life, but especially if you're meeting with somebody to give you money. And 3, it says, do all the talking. I think the thing that we always think about from like a salesperson perspective or a donor cultivation kind of perspective is, I got to tell them all this information, how great the program is, how great the organization is, how great this is going to be, how we can use their money, how this is going to change everything for us, et cetera, et cetera. But what you really are cultivating is a relationship here with this donor, and you want them to be able to voice their concerns if they have any. You want them to ask you, questions about what's going on, because especially if they're a major donor, they're going to have concerns about how their money is spent, when their money is spent, what the outcome of their money is going to be. And you may not capture all that in your pitch to them. So allow them the opportunity to be able to develop a relationship with you as a fundraising individual and a professional, and allow them to ask their questions that they may have and listen to their concerns or their questions or their, or just small talk with them. I think it's a relationship building exercise as well as, like asking for money. So it's less transactional and more, like education and relationship building, I think. Then 4, act like a spin doctor. Listen, we've all been in a situation where you have to report bad news. If one of those conversations is bad news, you can try and spin it. But I think having good preparation, and sometimes they ask very good questions that you may not have the answer to. And I think it's always better if you say, that's a great plan, that's a great question, let me go back and ask it, than opposed to trying to spin it or step outside of your comfort zone and try to speak financials if you're not literate with the financial data. There may be a really good reason why their question has come up or why they see a hole in the financials, and you need to be able to have them. 5 is leave nothing behind. Often you're not gonna have, I mean, it would be great if they whipped out their checkbook and wrote a $10,000 check for you right there. But often they need to consult with their accountants, their tax provider, their foundation, their whatever it is that they have. And you want to leave something with their impressions. So like an annual report, a newsletter, a magazine, materials about upcoming donor events, nicely, kind of like brochure of what you're doing in your nonprofit organization. We often call this like marketing swag or something like that, but leave them with something to remember you by. And and I think that's all the better, and not just a card. I think I think you need to give them more information on what they're donating about. So I'll put it out to the group. Did you think they missed anything? You think maybe they're off base on any of these, or I think they made some really good points, but I'd love to get the gallery's input on this and see what you guys think.
Yeah, I think there are some other basic general rules of going into any sort of meeting, right? Like, don't forget to be professional, right? You don't want to be too casual with your donors. One of the points that they made in there, which I think was interesting, because first point is don't forget to ask for money. Well, I would say know who your donors are, right? Because if you're going to every meeting asking for money, that gets old, right? Know what kind of meeting you're having. Know if they're expecting an ask. Don't be shy about your ask, but don't necessarily go to every meeting with your hand out, because that can be detrimental to your cause as well, because nothing turns off a donor more than constantly soliciting for funds. One of the techniques they mentioned, which AJ was talking about sales, and I think this is a great technique, is you ask boldly for support, then be quiet, right? Because people are so used to filling the silence in the room with conversation. It's like, no, give it time to breathe. Let them think, let them have their space, and then let them respond. So if anything, that's a great takeaway for any meeting. What do some of you other guys think?
I'll jump in here. Well, I felt it was an interesting article, and it kind of touched on some good points. I think there's almost like a when you're looking for a large donor, there's got to be a lot of pressure on the person, organizing the meeting, and like AJ touched on all the points. I mean, you a lot of times you'll get so engrossed in your organization, you forget to ask for the money. And of course, it's very important not to be late, because this person probably is tight for time because he's a busy person. I like the article. It's very interesting. It made you think of the process of trying to land a big donor.
Yeah, that's a good comment on all fronts. I think that my favorite part of this whole article is, if you're going to follow up. I think that's the other part. It's always hard to do the ask. I do think that that's usually the hardest part of kind of the conversation. But the other hard part that can come out just because people forget, or you don't jot down the notes of, oh yeah, I was going to follow up on that, because you do that and then time goes by and all of a sudden you might have lost an opportunity. So if you say you're going to follow up, or if there was a question on the table, ensure that you do. Make sure that you do what you say you're going to do on that point of view. And I also really enjoyed the fact of listening, because I think we've talked in many podcasts before. A lot of this is relationship building. It's understanding your donors. It's understanding that relationship and knowing how to do the ask and what you're asking for. You can't do that if you're doing all the talking. So you do need to really open up your ears and listen and discover, why this particular charity or this particular cause is going to be important to the donor. It'll make everything else easier. It'll make the ask easier. It'll make the discussion easier. It'll just make a lot of those things easier if you listen. So I think that's a really good article that's brought to the table. Mark, you're next.
Yeah, I've got a light one this week. I found a fun article, not necessarily nonprofit related, but for those of you out in our vast listening audience who might be accountants, I found this article that's called 10 Things You Will Never Hear a Decent Accountant Say. So I just wanted to kind of bring some of these to the table and see if you guys had some extras that especially related to nonprofits that you wouldn't want said either. So number one, yes, my fees could be lower if you pay me in cash. 2, yes, I'll find a way to justify all those supermarket receipts in your accounts. 3, sure, you can pay me less because you've ignored my advice on how to make more profits. 4, your tax return only took me 5 minutes to do. 5, I love working from carrier bags full of client paperwork. Oh, that one stings. 6, I have decided not to charge you anything this year. 7, the tax man will give up once he knows I'm representing you. Dangerous. And let's just do one more. Don't worry about getting me receipts. So these are all things, especially for those of you who've worked a tax season or two, probably don't want to hear. I opened it up to the group because I'm sure we could come up with a list of 100 between us here.
One that I always love is, no, you don't need approval for any of those expenses. As a nonprofit accountant, of course you do, especially if you're getting audited, you need some kind of control piece in place to show that somebody approved the expense, reviewed the reconciliation. So yeah, I think that's one you'd never hear from an auditor or a nonprofit accountant, hopefully. So, or the other one is there's no need to track funds, or have a budget. That's one that I always think, budget smudgets, who needs that? So, but yeah, Tammy, you have any for us?
My favorite one, which is not on this list, is it usually comes up in conversations where, even though I don't do taxes, a lot of my friends will talk about taxes in front of me and they'll say, I can deduct this, right? This is a deductible expense. I'm like, No, it's not deductible. Or, or you giving, your $25 to your kid every week is not a charitable contribution. You may feel like it is, but it is not. So it's not deductible. And then it's always, kind of interesting when people say, oh, well, I, went ahead and deducted this on my taxes. I'm like, do not tell me that. Like, this is, did you, ask anybody if that was okay? Did you read any, regulations to see if that was valid? Because I don't think that's a valid thing. They're like, I'm like, oh, no. So yeah, those were pretty funny, Mark. So thanks for sharing that and lightening the mood.
I thought it was very comical. And I'm convinced most people don't really understand the accounting practices. Like AJ said, I mean, you need backup. And, and I've seen this in my career when I first kind of started out. People would bring you a whole bag of receipts, and then when you tell them what it's going to cost, why so much? Well, I have a gazillion receipts I got to go through over here. So, yeah, it's just, I thought it was funny.
Yeah. What I thought it's comical. I think people do think, accounting is some like magical wand or something. I get, questions all the time from non-accountants who know I'm an accountant. And all of a sudden they think you're a tax expert on something or something that they don't, that can save them money on their taxes. So that's always a funny one, but yeah, from a good accountant, you would never hear, I have the magic wand that can make you pay less taxes.
Yeah, and all throughout the year you hear that, oh yeah, well, this is I gave to this GoFundMe, so I know that's my charitable giving for the year, and you're just like, cringe, cringe, cringe. But you're not paying me to do your taxes, so on we go. So I'm going to introduce this week's topic. It is nonprofit hiring do's and don'ts. So, of course, we're continuing on by popular request our list of do's and don'ts. And so I wanted to just kind of throw it out there for our group discussion, because hiring in a nonprofit sphere is similar to hiring in a for-profit sphere, but there are other considerations that we need to take into account. So just to kind of throw us into the mix, I think what you need to do first is assess your current team and decide what your talent needs are and how they fulfill the mission, right? It's always about the mission. I always come back to the mission. So do you actually need somebody? Is this a task that somebody else can fill, right? I guess the don't side of that would be don't overload somebody who already is working a full-time job with extra tasks just because you don't want to hire somebody. But if there's a real need and it fits the mission, figure out what that is first and go from there.
So I'll take it next here. I think, and to your point, Mark, I think assess your existing team and talent against your mission. I would also put, hire around your weaknesses. If you have a really strong like development department or a strong executive director, I think, hiring around maybe somewhere programmatic or accounting or something that you may not have as sure a grip on in the organization would be good. And then determine whether you can promote somebody from within. Often we see external, hirings for higher positions. I think, somebody that's been around and knows the mission and vision and the ins and outs of something is just as valuable as somebody maybe having an advanced degree or having a really fancy resume or something. So I would always look from within first before you hire outside to see if there's somebody internally that you could move up and then maybe replace their position that they're moving up from instead, because that, I guess, institutional knowledge and their track record. You're not trying out somebody new in that upper role that you're looking for. So, and to the other side of that, I would think, often in hiring, I think we get like caught up on like must-haves, like they have to have this, they have to have that. And, it's a non-starter. Of course, they need a minimum set of skills or experience in a position that you're hiring for. But I would say like, be flexible. If you think they need a doctorate's degree, but somebody with a a master's or a 4-year degree comes in and they have the experience and knowledge and really fit within your organization's like culture, that might be a better fit than somebody that just has a doctorate's degree in something and no practical experience. So I think, as a part of hiring, and especially nowadays, just be open to all sorts of candidates. I don't think you can afford just to narrowly put your head down and forge a very narrow path of what you're looking for, and never underestimate good experience over, like book knowledge, I guess is what I'm saying. If somebody has a lot of experience in a fundraising sphere, that's really, as we talked about in the earlier articles, that's really relationship building. If they have those relationships available already, that's far more powerful than some kind of degree in that area. So just put that out there.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting kind of thought. I also like to hire from within and promote people up, but I also want to be realistic on what the expectations are, right? So if you are hiring for a specific role or that requires specific experience or degrees or whatever those may be, really understand that. Hire the qualified person, but you may not get all the must-haves or the nice-to-haves type of thing. So you need to, once you hire that, understand the talent that you hired, and then what kind of things that you would need to do to set them up for success. Because I think that is kind of the interesting kind of thought about some hiring mistakes. Is you do bring, let's say you have this great talent, you want to raise someone from within, give them the opportunity, and there's some things that they need in their tool bag in order to be successful. But you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. I just hired them because they know the history, they have passion for the mission, they have all these things. But then we don't set them up for success once they're in that position, especially if they don't have the experience that what that particular position was requiring. So be flexible, be open, but also be honest and kind of set a game plan for those types of candidates. And same thing, if you have someone who has a million degrees under their in their resume, but they don't have any experience, that could be a concern. Be realistic to that particular point of view. So I really think that when there's a good commercial out there where talking about resumes building, I think, where it talks about the piece of paper is just my resume, but it doesn't tell you the full story about me. And they have all this animation. I think that's true with everybody, every hiring decision. The resume does say one thing, but it's meeting the people, understanding their passion and their motivation, as well as their skill sets and their experience, that really brings that whole full picture of a particular candidate. And so the other thing too, I guess, to go along with that is don't be too rigid. Things don't go according to plan, right? You think that you may have created a perfect position, and then you realize, oh, that position actually should shift a little bit, or we need to pivot, or you hired a person that was, going to be a perfect fit, and maybe they're not. Maybe it's one of those things that they need more coaching, or they need development, or there's other things. So it's kind of be open, obviously, in the front part, but then also don't be so rigid, and then you're not able to pivot and move accordingly.
I was going to talk about the compensation. I think it's important to, like the size of the nonprofit. A lot of small nonprofits, the people that they have on staff wear more than one hat, do more than one job. And then it's some of these bigger nonprofits, they have the capability and the resources to hire individual people who are well qualified that can do the job. So, I just wanted to touch base on that one.
Yeah, I think it's something I want to get to. And I think those are all great points. One thing that when we're hiring that I want to kind of mention is that we don't ever think that we have internal biases, right? We think, well, I'm going into this job interview and I'm being fair to everybody. But I think it's really important to keep in mind, whether you're hiring for profit or nonprofit, that there are internal biases that exist, and you need to go in well aware and well conditioned for those. So I'm going to give you an example of a few of these just so you can kind of understand. So the halo bias, or horn bias, which there's one thing on this person's resume which makes them stand out and wear a halo, or I'm dismissing this person totally because of this one thing that I see on a resume. First impression. Some people are nervous when they come into a job interview. You might immediately take a first impression of them and say they're not going to be a fit, and I'm done with them. Intuition. Well, your intuition is definitely something you should pay attention to and follow. But sometimes that gut feeling, like when somebody walks in, oh, I just had a gut feeling they weren't the right fit. Well, let it play out and let them show you, and try to put your biases at the door with regard to that. Confirmation bias is also one of my favorites, right? So I'm talking with a candidate. I tend to like this candidate. So they tell me 10 things. I'm going to glom onto the one thing that's going to confirm my feelings, as opposed to the 9 things that might go contrary to what the mission or the organization really needs. And finally, nonverbal bias, I think, is important to watch out for, because, again, people come into job interview processes maybe nervous. They might have their arms folded or whatever. And if you're taking nonverbal cues and saying, well, they're not really interested in this job anyway, let's just keep looking, try to check those biases at the door. And if you can't, at least have awareness of them, so that you're looking at each candidate based on their qualifications and not on your own perceptions.
Really good points, Mark. And I might add to that in saying, to help curb those biases, or to help, kind of get a better view of a candidate, I would say one that would be don't go this alone. Don't make it a one-man hiring process or a one-woman hiring process. It would be, you want to involve multiple people here so you can get an impression from all angles. So if you're a small organization, sometimes that may mean wrapping board members into this if you're a one man or woman show. But I would say, having them fit in the organization and having them integrated into the culture of your organization is very important for them to feel welcome as a new hire. And so you wouldn't want to bring somebody on that isn't going to mesh with people they're going to be working with. And you want to curb, hopefully, your biases by bringing out somebody else in to see it from maybe a different perspective. And, be able to, maybe your first impression was wrong and they were able to see it from a different point of view, where this person, had a hectic ride over there and they called to let them know that they were being late and they were flustered or whatever it is, like I would hope that you would have a buddy system in place that, you could do an interview and get feedback from different parts of the organization on who this new hire is going to affect and who they're going to work with. So the other one, the don't to that, is holding on to toxic people. If they really don't fit your mission and vision and they came there just for a paycheck, or they're just a toxic person in general, even if they're your best development person and are bringing in tons of money, you can't afford that, that kind of toxicity in your workplace. And you need to get rid of those people as soon as possible. And it doesn't matter what position they're in. I've been in numerous situations where they had to let go of an ED because they were not doing their job correctly, or not integrating with the organization, or they were causing a toxic workplace. And that's a very difficult situation to have, especially if they're a new ED that you put a lot of time and effort into recruiting. But the alternative is to continue to let that fester, and it can destroy an organization from within. So it's really important to make sure that, the people you're bringing in meshes with your mission vision of the organization, but also the people that are there that have spent long hours together and been in the trenches of what they're doing, for them to feel like this person coming in is going to be an asset to them and not a liability, to bring it back to accounting.
I think that's pretty true. Good point there, AJ. I think the other thing to kind of add to this is, remember that as a company or an organization, you're being interviewed as well. So you may be interviewing somebody for a particular job position, but they're interviewing you to see if this is a place that they want to work at, right? So make sure that you are, you're passionate about your mission and the organization and what you're doing, and sell the organization to that particular individual as well. And then the other thing that I always really, really push for is allow the interviewee to ask questions about the organization, ask questions about the position, ask questions about the culture, the mission, all those various different things, so that, you're not just only asking questions and letting them talk, but that you're allowing them to ask you questions as well to make sure it's a good fit. And I think that as we were going through this, maybe a suggestion for a couple of weeks from now or so is to think about maybe the interview do's and don'ts, right? Because I think we've all been part of an interview process, either as the person being interviewed or the person who is interviewing somebody, where it's like there's probably some horror stories of where people can get a little bit of the do's and don'ts when you're in an interview to maybe help along the way. Because that's, as Mark was talking earlier, those are the things that I'm thinking of. I was like, oh, I remember when a candidate did this, and I was like, there's nothing I could do after that, that comment or story or whatever they may have said that would have helped them in their situation. But that could be for a topic for a few weeks from now.
One of the other ones we didn't cover that I thought was a good one was don't give candidates a test that they don't know they're taking. And this actually happened to me when I was going through accounting recruiting, and I went and interviewed for a staff accountant position at a local public CPA firm that shall remain unnamed. But they had you come in and you had no idea that there was going to be a test, and they had you create a depreciation schedule and type out an email with no kind of internet access to be able to, look anything up. They wanted to see but it was very jarring, and it was very unexpected. And you're going in there expecting to meet people and speak about stuff, and they are throwing you questions about ratios and a depreciation schedule. And you're in the mode of trying to make a great first impression on people that you're meeting and having a conversation with them. And they're essentially giving you an assessment test when they have access to your grades. And, this is really industry knowledge, although you should be able to put the depreciation schedule together. I froze up. I'll be completely honest. I did not do good on that test, even though I was capable of producing what they needed. There was no resources there for you. And it wasn't a good assessment of my real world skills when asked to do that, when, there's 1,000 different depreciation schedule templates in Excel. There's, many kind of quick research things you can do to have availability to figure out how to perform an amortization schedule or something like that, or whatever nonsense test they were trying to put on. I don't think it was a good assessment of my skills as an accountant, especially at that moment, when you're coming into an interview. So it was one that I saw on the list we had, and I thought was really, really one that, don't put somebody through that. I think, a probationary period to see how they're going to work is much easier than trying to stick them with a, 40 question quiz when they walk in for an interview.
AJ, I so feel your pain on this one. I have been in job interviews. The ones that get me are the personality tests, right? You don't even want to talk to me as a person. You want to have me take a multiple choice, fill in the bubble, are you more this or this, and it's like, oh, we're not going to assess anything. This is just a personality test. And it's like, if I'm going into interview for a company who thinks they can assess my personality based on a multiple choice fill in the bubble, I don't want to work for them anyway. So just be aware as a hirer that this might not be your best tactic moving forward.
I will add to that, though. This is kind of what a lot of organizations are doing, whether it is the personality tests or the fit test. There's also, I had a friend who a company ended up sending a case study, but luckily they gave them advance warning saying you're going to be doing this case study, but it was a walkthrough case study to see how you kind of assess a financial statement analysis or preparation. So it may be the wave of the future that we're kind of facing, I guess from a interviewee perspective, you might want to be prepared for that. But then to Mark's point, if that's not an organization that you want to do, that's going to test you in one way or the other, maybe think about that as you go through. But it's shocking to me and how many companies are doing that for almost every. I've heard of doing it for a receptionist or executive assistant to make sure test the PowerPoint skills, test the Outlook skills, test the skills that are really key to that thing. But now they're starting to expand it to all sorts of levels of an FP&A person or a controller or something like that. And it's hard, one, to develop what those tests should look like, because, to AJ's point, testing on depreciation, should you be able to do that? Yes. Are you going to be able to do that on the fly without doing something you're not prepared? You probably could, but it's going to be weird. It might feel really awkward, but it's hard. How do you test someone's skills for doing that without doing a case study? But at the same time, it's different. And I don't think a lot of people are used to doing it that way. And so not being prepared to do that could backfire in a lot of situations.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm not totally opposed to skills testing, but I just don't like them as a screener, right? Like coming in the front door and making you take a test first thing to decide if they even want to talk to you. And I know people get a lot of candidates and they have to figure out some way to weed out the wheat from the chaff, if you will. But if I'm coming in the front door and you're handing me a multiple choice test, I'm just like, yeah, this feels too much like the DMV.
Yeah. But if you do a test, you should share it. Even if it's a personality test or fitness test or a case study test, I think you should share the results with the person, because that's the part where it becomes even more. It's like, I took a personality test and I didn't get a call back. I guess I assume they did not like my personality, but it'd be interesting to see what that is, right? So I think that if you do, require a test for some part of you, or especially if it's a fun case study, or here's what the things we were looking for that you didn't get, so people know what the results are, and especially with the personalities assessment, because I've done that on for previous companies where I did kind of a fit personality kind of test, and it was interesting to see the results. I mean, and then we had a discussion about it, which I think was great in terms of the interview process, because it was like, well, here are some of the things that said about your mentoring or your coaching or your XYZ, whatever the topics were. And then we were able to discuss it of like, oh, that's interesting. I do see that could be true. Or, yeah, I don't know, how that question that they asked got to that answer, but, it's an interesting point of view, or here's how I would address it, or here's how I see it differently. But it gives an opportunity for discussion. I just don't think it can be your only method of kind of testing. And then it's like you passed or failed. And if you failed, I'll never talk to you again. It doesn't seem that would make sense.
Well, and I think that's the point, right? At least the point I'm seeing in this whole discussion is that if you're going to have a test or some kind of skills assessment, I would make that separate from the interview, or at least let the interviewee know that it's going to happen. Not a surprise. Here's your 20-point personality test, and then after that, you're going to go to a computer with no internet access and create a depreciation schedule or whatever it is, right? Like, so I think being open and honest with your candidates, and hopefully that shows that you care about their mental well-being too. I mean, I think making them sit in a dark room and make a depreciation. I'm just on this depreciation schedule. Sorry, it's bringing up such bad memories.
You were scarred by this.
I was emotionally scarred.
Poor AJ.
Don't worry, I got over it. I mean, kinda, I guess it's so.
So we didn't tell you this, AJ, but at the end of this podcast, we would like for you to build a depreciation schedule and share it with the group.
Perfect. I'm Googling it now.
By hand on ledger paper.
On ledger paper, right? With my debits and credits equaling, and yeah. But I think yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to wrap us up with a final do and don't. And I think this kind of inspired this conversation we just had, inspired a final do that I think is really important. Do close out the position when you've filled it, right? It's polite, it's responsible, and it shows a level of professionality in your company that when you hire for the position, let those people who are really interested and got through the interview stage know we filled this position. Sometimes it's not as easy to do with everybody who sent a resume in, but if they've done an interview, you don't want to just leave people hanging forever. And for any of us who have been out there in job hunting world, that 90% of the times you just never hear back if you didn't get the position, and it sucks. So that would be my do, and my don't, especially for nonprofits. This is one of my pet peeves. Don't add your rejected candidates to your fundraising list. I mean, if you do that, shame on you. It's tacky. I'll just leave it there.
I have a quick anecdote, actually. One of the boards I was on, they had to fire a board member because he was working in the fundraising campaign stuff, and he took the fundraising campaign emails and added them to his sales list. He was working as I forget, in some sales role. And wow, that was outrageously inappropriate. And I think the same is true with candidates. Please don't add them to your donation ask list. It's just awful, especially if you rejected him as a candidate.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Profitless on Purpose, the nonprofit focused accounting podcast. Please hit the like and subscribe buttons if you're watching this on YouTube, or rate us on your favorite podcast app. Check us out on Twitter at Profitless Pod. We'd like to hear your feedback and any suggestions that you may have. So thank you very much, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.